Welcome to Anews. I'm Umar Taslim, and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. As Gaza's death toll surpasses 60,000 and famine claims more lives each day, international outrage is growing, but political action remains painfully slow. Today, we'll discuss why this humanitarian catastrophe continues, what the UK's recognition of Palestine could mean for Europe, and how controversial moves are shaping the course of Israel's genocide. Joining me on the program today are Daily Sabah's editorial coordinator, Dr. Mehmet Çelik, and political activist, Dr. Azam Tamimi. In the second half of the program, political analyst Javed Rana will be joining us from Pakistan's capital, Islamabad.
This box of provisions fell from the sky over Gaza and is meant to feed Amal Abu Asi's family. It's a humiliation, the mother of three says, and not enough. Her children are hungry and unhealthy and can't remember eggs, meat and fruit. The IPC Hunger Monitor said on Tuesday famine is unfolding in Gaza, where Israel has placed severe restrictions on aid. Faced with a mounting international outcry, Israel on Sunday announced humanitarian pauses in its military campaign and assistance for those wanting to conduct airdrops. But aid groups say airdrops are ineffective, costly and tokenistic. Abu Asi wants aid to come in as it used to, via trucks through the border.
This package isn't even worth us running after it and dying for. They fall on people's tents, their homes, people fight each other, hold knives. It's just not worth it. If it was, we'd say yes, drop them. But no, we're against this. I speak for myself and the whole Gaza Strip.
Gaza health authorities have been reporting more people dying from hunger-related causes. The total stood at 147 on Tuesday, among them 88 children, most of whom died in the last few weeks. This was Samar Abdul Jabbar of the UN's World Food Programme.
Especially now we're talking about catastrophic levels of needs. So the only way to bring in scale is actually the use of the land crossings.
The airdrops can also be dangerous, as Mohammed Abulainain found at his home in Gaza City.
What happened is that the parachute fell on the roof. It damaged the roof. People attacked the house. This is not the way to distribute aid. The old way was we would receive a text message to get an aid coupon. People attacked us for the sake of an aid parcel. People are hungry.
Faris Zahir's kids watch him unpack another box. It's not enough for a family of 8, he says, but the alternatives are fraught with danger. The UN estimates that Israeli forces have killed more than 1,000 people seeking food supplies, most of them near the militarized distribution sites of the US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF. The GHF says it has distributed over 96 million meals since late May. We want something safer for us and our children, Zahir says. The IPC alert raised the prospect that the man-made starvation crisis in Gaza could be formally classified as a famine, and that could pressure Israel to let in more food. Gaza hit another grim milestone on Tuesday, as the death toll from the conflict with Israel passed 60,000 people, according to the enclave's health authorities. Palestinian officials and rescue workers believe thousands more bodies are buried under the rubble.
Welcome back to the program. Dr. Mehmet Çelik and Dr. Azam Tamimi, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Umar.
Dr. Mehmet, I'll begin with you. We've been seeing how Israel is continuing its genocide in the occupied Gaza Strip. Over 60,000 people have been killed. There's no aid, there's no humanitarian aid, and there's no international assistance as well. Now, Dr. Mehmet, why is this humanitarian crisis even being allowed to continue at this point?
Why is it being allowed to continue? I mean, this question, I find it to be a very hard one to answer. Why is it being allowed when, as humanity, we have progressed so much, but yet such barbaric actions are still taking place? It is something that it should be so simple. It shouldn't happen. Children shouldn't be dying because of a man-made hunger. Children shouldn't be suffering because They have, they're suffering because bombs are being dropped on them when they have nothing to do with the world yet, let alone with any of the conflict, with political differences around the world. Children that they have only had a certain amount of breath counts in this world. They're suffering from oppression, from occupation, from a genocide. That as soon as they open their eyes to this world, why is still this continuing? Well, there's an ideology that is very perverse in their interpretation of a certain theological text, that they see themselves as a people beyond and above anybody that exists around them. So when that is the case, everything becomes legitimate for their end game. I mean, when Dr. Azam Tamimi is here, perhaps it's not my place to talk about any of this stuff, as someone that has spent all his life talking about these things. But, my humble opinion is that why is this still continuing? Because there is a very rigid ideology from, I wouldn't even call it a Dark Ages interpretation. They live in a moment, ideological moment in their head that has no attachment to values of this world, no attachment to any humanitarian law, no attachment to any international law, no attachment to any norms and anything that we value as human beings, when they can use hunger as a weapon against civilians. I mean, when that is the case, it's hard to make any analysis. I mean, how do you fight against an ideology that puts one type of people above everything in this world? And I'm not just talking about destroying buildings. I'm not talking about destroying infrastructure. They're targeting everything that counts as war crimes, targeting hospitals, targeting schools, targeting medical supplies, medical staff, targeting journalists, targeting UN workers, targeting diplomats at times. And that occupation started more than 7 decades ago, before the world's eyes, and it's still continuing at different levels, right? Nakba took place. We still live the memory of that. But today a genocide is taking place. And unless this ideology, this perverse interpretation of a holy text stops, or someone puts a block in front of that ideology, that will continue to expand. And we all know that the end game is not just Gaza. West Bank is suffering. The ultimate aim is East Jerusalem. The ultimate aim is expanding this occupation and violence beyond what we call Palestine and the occupied territories. Lebanon is suffering from that. Syria is suffering from that. The whole region, actually, the whole international community is suffering from this ideology that is spreading like a virus in the region.
Dr. Azam, we've been seeing that support for Israel in the West has been declining. Look at France, look at the UK. Canada has also issued a statement. But the UK now says it will recognize Palestine, but it comes with conditions. So how are you looking at what the UK has done and the decisions that it has been taking over the past few months, let's say? Because now they're saying if Israel does not initiate a ceasefire, then the UK will recognize the state of Palestine. It has to bring in more humanitarian aid for the Gazans. How are you looking at this decision by the UK?
Well, first of all, the support for Israel is declining in the West among the people, but not really governments. I mean, governments sometimes pay lip service. And they pay lip service, and they bring up the issue of a two-state solution, not because they are empathizing with the Palestinians, but because they are worried about the Zionist project. They think that Netanyahu and his governing coalition have gone mad, and they're destroying the Zionist project, which the Europeans created in the first place for their own reasons. And therefore, the European governments are worried that if this were allowed to continue, it would mean the end of Israel. Talking about the two-state solution is just a distraction. And at the same time, it's laughable. I mean, the British are saying, okay, we will recognize Palestine as a state in September unless Israel stops the genocide. So what? Okay, suppose they stop the genocide. Okay, where do we go from there? This whole issue of a two-state solution is a mirage, is an illusion. What does it matter to me as a Palestinian for a useless, failing entity to be called a Palestinian state? We already have a Palestinian Authority that is acting as a military and security organ of the occupation, helping to consolidate and perpetuate the occupation. Do we want another failing Arab state like all these 20 or so failing Arab states? What's the point? We want the liberation of Palestine. We want the end of Zionism. And this is really the crucial thing. Zionism, and as Mohammed has rightly said, is an inhumane ideology. It's the reincarnation of Nazism. And Israel is a reincarnation of the Third Reich. And if I may add a little bit to why this is not stopping, it's not stopping for two reasons, or probably three reasons. First, the Zionist project is a European project, colonial project. Second, the Europeans don't see us as full human beings. Not only the Zionists, the Zionists are racists, they are supremacists, they believe that God gave them a divine license to do whatever they want, but the Europeans too. I'm talking here about the ruling elite and many people in the media. They think along the same lines. So we don't matter to them. The hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who are being starved to death don't matter to them. But third, it's the failure of the Arabs. The entire Arab surrounding of Palestine is paralyzed by despotic governments that have that have entered into a strategic alliance with Zionism. Today, Zionism is no longer is not restricted to a few Jewish individuals. Although of course there are many Jews who are anti-Zionist, and I commend them for that and salute them for that. But today we have Arab Zionists, we have Muslim Zionists, like we have Christian Zionists. So the ideology of Zionism is widespread, it's everywhere, and I regret to say that the entire Arab world is today in the shackles of Zionism.
Dr. Mehmet, the Israeli plans have changed. Now it's not occupation, it's annexation, not only of the West Bank, but also the entire occupied Gaza Strip, which was obviously the initial idea as well, the initial aim of the Israelis. What do you think about this, Mehmet? How dangerous is this decision by the Israeli Prime Minister that he's now saying we're going to annex the entire occupied Gaza Strip?
Well, I mean, just imagine the Gaza Strip is already destroyed. Thousands of people have been displaced. There is a genocide taking place. I think there is a problem with this discourse about genocide, that the use of it in media has been so widely now, and we have normalized it in a way. The concept of genocide, because we talk about it so much, and rightfully, obviously, for right reasons, but I think the world is, I'm afraid, getting used to this. We have normalized starving of children. We have normalized targeting of, hospitals. We have normalized leaving people under the rubble. Thousands of people now under the rubble. We don't even know the count, and that's normalized. That has not kept its place as the top on the agenda on our international media channels, for example. Now it's on perhaps third, fourth. When you look at mainstream Western front pages of the newspapers, it's very rarely now on the front pages, but that is normalized. And because of that, I think, the occupation being, the annexation of Gaza, for example, what would that mean? That means a state, a land without people. Because Netanyahu's mindset will not accept any Palestinians to live there and resist the occupation. So his end game will be to erase all of them, and just annex it and occupy it and continue to expand the dispossession as they are doing it under the concept of settlements in West Bank. Settlement, the word settlement, I think, is problematic in itself, because it is nothing but dispossessing people of their own land. Mr. Fidan, Turkish Foreign Minister, said, we use the terminology of the settlement, but this is nothing but stealing. I think this is very important. The language matters. So when we say annexation, when we talk about expanding so-called settlements in the West Bank, when we talk about the activities even in the East Jerusalem and the raids, I think that discourse must be a lot more clearer to be presented to the international community, international public opinion, and we need to say it as it is. As Mr. Fidan, when he was saying, this is stealing. Let's not use the terminology settlement. And Netanyahu will be doing that. He will be stealing someone's land. We've seen many social media videos when they knock on the door, you need to leave the house. If I don't steal it, somebody else will come and steal it. Somebody else will come and take your house away from you. What is this? How can we even put some sense around this in 2025? Imagine somebody goes to any of the countries in the global north or the Western hemisphere, and they just knock on the door and say, you know what, you got to leave. In the United States, somebody will shoot you for doing that, right? But this is done systemically by a so-called state as an action that is done under the so-called security to ensure their own security. But you're erasing, and I'm using the word erasing deliberately because you are cleansing peoples from their land, and you're going to expand that occupation. Gaza Strip, West Bank, occupied territories. There's an owner for this land. There's peoples called Palestinians, and they own this land. You can't just go and say, I'm going to annex it, I'm going to occupy it, unless you do it through force, which you are doing through a genocide right now, before the world's eyes, and you're being supported by the so-called Israeli allies in the West, European countries, as well as the most the biggest supporter, the United States. I mean, this is not something that is done, of course, not through any legal frameworks, not any norm-based frameworks. This is done through violence. And if Netanyahu is going to say, I am going to eliminate every Palestinian in Gaza, then I'm going to annex it, then he will be able to do that. But I think, on the other hand, we should also recognize the resistance in face of this occupation. We need to highlight the women and children and men and civilians that are still not willing to leave their homes, despite all this violence. I think this is something that is very honorable and respectful, that people are not fleeing in face of this, despite starvation, they still stick to their lands because this is their land.
They're sticking to their lands, but Israel is now forcibly displacing them. Dr. Zam, tell me about these recent plans of a so-called humanitarian city. Now, it's not a humanitarian city; it's actually a concentration camp. What are the consequences if this goes ahead?
Well, the purpose of going through this is to pressure the Palestinians into capitulation. This is what the Israelis want. I mean, this war is approaching the end of its second year. I mean, in 2 months, it would have been 2 years since it started. And the Palestinians are still adhering to their land, adhering to their rights. They're still determined to resist. They're resisting, actually. And this is another desperate attempt by the Israelis and their American allies to use starvation as a weapon to subjugate the Palestinians or blackmail the resistance movement, Hamas specifically, to accept whatever conditions they have. But I think they're clearly they're failing, and the struggle did not start on the 7th of October. Palestinians have been struggling not even since 1948. They've been struggling since the British mandate was set up by the League of Nations in Palestine. and when the British started paving the way for the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And that resistance never stopped. My grandfather was in the resistance. My father was in the resistance. Generation after generation, Palestinians will continue to be in the resistance. And even if the people of Gaza are wiped out, even if Gaza is completely cleansed of its population, that's not going to be the end. This struggle will continue. And the Israelis and their allies are not learning from history. They've assassinated, and by the way, today is the anniversary, is the first anniversary of the assassination of Ismail Haniya Abu al-Abd, rahimahullah. Before him, they assassinated so many Palestinian leaders. After him, they assassinated quite a few Palestinian leaders. And they may continue to assassinate. They may continue to destroy and cause pain. But the flame of resistance will continue. Because Palestine is not only a Palestinian land. Palestine means a lot to more than 1 billion Muslims around the world. For it is the land of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj. It is the land that to which the Prophet ﷺ was taken on a night journey on his way to the upper heavens. So it's part of our deen. There's a surah in the Quran about it, and it's been mentioned repeatedly in other surahs. If you finish off all the Palestinians, there will be a group of Muslims somewhere, sometime in the near future who will come and liberate the land.
Dr. Zam, you've been saying that Muslims are supposed to protect this cause, but we've not seen the same reaction. Look at Jordan, look at Egypt. Now, both of these governments are being criticized for their inaction, and especially Egypt, because they're saying that you have not opened the Rafah crossing, you did not let people in. How would you, comment on the actions taken by both of these governments?
See, the greatest success of the Zionist movement has not been the occupation of Palestine, has not been the dispossession of the Palestinians. It has been the recruitment of Arab leaders to become in the service of Zionism. This is what we see in Arab capitals, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Persian Gulf. Arab governments are in the employment of the Zionist movement. The peoples themselves in Egypt, in North Africa, in the Gulf, everywhere in the region, the people are dying to do something for Palestine. But look at the prisons in the Arab world. They're full of people who are intellectuals, the writers, the journalists, people who defend freedom of speech, scholars of the deen, ulama. They're all in prison, tens of thousands of them. These governments are using all the brutal force that is available to them in order to silence the population. But I think we are approaching another volcanic eruption. Similar, probably a lot more brutal than the one we saw in 2011. Another volcanic eruption in the Arab world is coming soon.
Dr. Mehmet, there's a stark difference when we compare the reaction from the Arab world and when we compare it to the reaction given by the Turkish government and President Erdogan. How would you analyze the reaction and the support and the assistance that the Turkish government has done or taken for the Palestinians?
Well, first of all, there's a, rightfully, as Mr. Dr. Tamimi said, there's a disconnect between the governments and the people. And I think the stark difference between Türkiye and some of the other Muslim countries is that there is no disconnect between people and the state or the government when it comes to Palestine. And this dates back to before October 7, because Palestinian issue or the Palestinian struggle and resistance is something that is held above politics in Turkey. This has been the case for many decades, as Turkish politicians, Turkish leaders have always stood by the Palestinian cause in one way or another. When it comes to Mr. Erdogan's position on Palestine, I mean, his whole political movement, his whole political career, Palestine has been at the very center of his agenda, and as it has been similar to the other Muslims under oppression in different parts of the world, Mr. Erdogan has always stood by the oppressed. When it comes to Palestine, I mean, Turkey took very strong position in terms of cutting trade ties, and this is something, when it comes to joining that International Court of Justice, when it comes to other, at least loudly voicing the injustice there in every international platform. Turkey has been part of the negotiation efforts at some level or the other. Nevertheless, I think, the disconnect between the people and the governments across Muslim world is something that we need to think about when it comes to the issues that are affecting the Muslim community as a whole. When we talk about Palestine, this is something that has become, of course, as there is a genocide taking place, as part of our agenda. But what about Kashmir? What about Myanmar? What about the struggles in Afghanistan that for over 3-4 decades that Muslims suffer? What about Syria? Israel is attacking Damascus, and Muslim world is simply watching that. There is a very fragile process that needs to be supported, for example, in Syria, that could have, if it doesn't materialize, if it is not successful, it could have wider regional implications. So I think, that the issues of the Muslim world, including Palestine, including Kashmir, including other parts of the world, it needs to bother the leaderships in the Muslim world. It needs to bother people. It needs to become a matter for thought for all of us in the Muslim world. Otherwise, when a cancer attacks one part of the body, the rest of the body is also affected by that. And if that is not the case, then we shouldn't talk about anything that's called Muslim unity, Muslim community, Muslim ummah. It becomes just a rhetoric, just simple words. If this is not the case, then why do we have OIC? Why was the OIC established in the first place, right? Why is there an Arab League or Muslim League or this or other D8 or some of these organizations? I mean, we always criticize UN Security Council. We always criticize the European Union. Let's criticize BRICS or United Nations, but sure, they have a lot to do with the inaction in face of this genocide. But what are we doing about this? When you talked about Egypt, we know that there's a disconnect between people and the government. We talk about wider Arab world. That's something that is very clearly acknowledged. But as people, if we are not doing the simplest things that we can do, as in when we go to a supermarket and we choose the product that is supplied by a company, by a firm that supports directly Israel, then we have, as individuals, failed to do our part. Our personal choice. Sure, we can't, let's say, influence the governments. We can't influence the leaders in the Muslim world. But can't we even have a ruling over or on our own choices? Because simply there is 2 chocolate bars, you pick one and you don't pick the other. If this is the least you can do. If you can't do beyond that, at least talk about it. Are we even doing that openly? Are we able to even, show the picture as it is in our media channels, for example, across the Muslim world? I think that disconnect between the people and the governments, that is something very important to think about. But as the people, as individuals even, are we really doing our part? Türkiye, Mr. Erdogan is since that moment when he said 1 minute at Davos, I think, he's been under the spotlight because of his firm stance, because of him calling things as it is against the people that were on the stage with him. Killing, he said, this is what you do. Since then, he's been actually attacked. If we were to have a second thought about what happened then, since then, Mr. Erdogan's government has been facing so many different economic challenges. We had a coup attempt in Turkey. Why, if Mr. Erdogan was not standing against the international pressure when it comes to issues like Palestine, he wouldn't have faced any of these challenges, because he would become a puppet in their hands. But he's standing against different types of injustices around the world. He's voicing them, so he becomes a target. And I think this is something that is a reflective of why he's seen as a different leader in the Muslim world, why he's seen as someone that could lead the region. Of course, there is limitations to everyone's power, and Turkey acknowledges that there is a limitation to its material capabilities when it comes to, let's say, different types of interventions. But when there is a power like United States on the other side, we need to do everything within our limits. And if we're not doing that, then we should question ourselves.
Dr. Zab, now there is a report by the Palestinian Youth Movement and the groups World Beyond War and Arms Embargo Now, which says that Canada continued supplying Israel with bullets, cartridge parts, and F-35 jet parts. What do you think about this? We can see the double standards clearly. When we see statements made by President Trump, we can see the double standards there as well. A week ago, Trump was saying there's no starvation, these are fake images, and now just a few days ago, he had said that there is starvation, we're going to send more food, we're going to send more aid. How do you look at this double standard?
Well, if you're talking about Trump, this is his nature. I mean, he can say something in the morning and change his mind in the afternoon or even earlier, and change his mind again in the early evening. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, the concern in the minds of most Western leaders is the fate of Zionism and Israel, and not the fact that the Palestinians are being butchered or that the fact that the Palestinians are being starved to death. And also they're facing a growing popular pressure. The new generation in North America, in Europe, actually in much of the world, the new generation, the students on campuses, are now having different opinions to those that their fathers and grandparents had vis-a-vis the Zionist project and the occupation of Palestine. And I think those who are in power today are gravely concerned that very soon in the future, this will lead to a massive shift. This will probably impact on the world order. And that takes me back to what you've been saying about the limitations and why we are limited. Even if you love to do something about Palestine, and I'm sure about the position of President Erdogan and the position of the Turks, but much of these limitations are forced even on those who are willing because of the world order of which we have been part. This is a very unjust world order, hypocritical world order that was the product of the Second World War, and that was intended to perpetuate the hegemony of the victors in that war. I think the current authorities in London, in Paris, in Washington, in Ontario, and in the rest of the world are worried that this world order is going to collapse, is going to be destroyed by their own children, by their own sons and daughters who have taken to the streets and demonstrated in support of the Palestinians or in denunciation of Zionism. And that's why I'm optimistic that all these sacrifices by the people of Gaza are not going to be in vain. I think Gaza is going to lead the way to changing the current world order. This world order has to change. And I think Erdogan mentioned this several times when he spoke about the Security Council and how come that...
World is bigger than five.
Yes, the world is bigger than five. They continue to control humanity, to control its resources, to divide the world the way they wish. This has to come to an end. And I think that's why we need to globalize the support for the Palestinians and the opposition to Zionism in the form of a global movement against Zionism, in a global movement for rebuilding the world order.
Well, the narrative has shifted already.
It has.
The narrative, because the reality has been exposed not filtered through CNN and BBC, but it's being exposed through our cell phones now. Our journalists on the field are in Gaza when Israel is blocking every media outlet. The journalists can, the Gazan journalists, they risk their lives and they expose the reality to the rest of the world through our mobile phones. So the narrative is changing. There is an alternative discourse now, and I think that discourse is very vibrant among the youth, and this is why the youth has a different position than their preceding generations. Because prior to our generation, we watched the world through the lenses and the framing and the gatekeeping of CNN and BBC. Now that there's alternative voices, the reality is exposed very differently. The world is understanding that the injustices are not as simple as we were told. Everything is being live streamed. A genocide is being live streamed, and everyone has access to that show through their cell phones. In their pocket, it's mobile with them, right? I think that one of the dangers for the hegemony or for the dominant discourse is that now that alternative narrative is already bought in by the coming generations.
The monopoly has been broken.
The monopoly has been broken about the narrative and the discourse.
Mehmet, also, when you were mentioning CNN, BBC, even their narratives are now changing. I was watching a video. It was an airdrop over the occupied Gaza Strip. It was a plane from the UAE, and there were journalists from Sky News and BBC. And they said that Israel has asked us not to film whatever has been going on in the occupied Gaza Strip from above. But the journalist goes and says, but I've seen it with my own eyes. You can't stop me from doing that. So the narratives from those channels are changing as well, because we've been seeing how they were reporting in the beginning.
Omar, instead of the narratives as an editorial policy versus individual journalists trying to even stand against BBC's editorial policies is something different, I would say.
The BBC editorial policy is Israeli controlled.
I mean, the Western...
And that's been officially confirmed. They have someone from Israel that has an editorial mandate to control what goes on air.
CNN, BBC, New York Times, Fox, all these, the mainstream and popular Western media. We know that they have a framing of issues according to what they see is in the interest of whoever they are supported by, whoever they are funded by, whoever is controlling them, right? But we saw the news about BBC handing out notes to their staff or others about how to go about covering these issues. So the editorial policies of these media outlets has not changed. We are celebrating almost one or two incidents that they are saying, we see that reality is different on the ground. But the rest of the coverage is still the same.
And how many times the BBC refused to air certain documentaries because they saw them as biased toward the Palestinians. And
in singling out, we are actually, the fact that we are talking about these issues shows that there are exceptions. We are talking about exceptions, true. And if there was a unbiased coverage of Palestine when it comes to the genocide, their starvation, famine, the destruction, if there was an objective coverage, we wouldn't be talking about media right now. Sure. The fact that we're talking about it highlights that there is a very clear bias towards against Palestinians and against the injustice there.
Dr. Mehmet Çelik and Dr. Azam Tamimi, thank you so much for being in the studio with us today. It was a pleasure listening to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That marks the end of the first half of today's program. I'll be right back with you after a short break.